It is a freezing night in Moscow in the winter of 1982. A man sits alone in a parked car on a quiet street. He is a colonel in the KGB. He is 53 years old. He is an engineer, not a field agent. His name is Vladimir Vetrov, and he is carrying out one of the most damaging betrayals in the history of the Soviet Union. Not with a gun, not with a bomb, with a camera and a pile of documents. Over the past year, Vetrov has photographed nearly 4,000 secret documents. They describe how the Soviet Union has been quietly stealing the technology of the West. Not for years, for decades. And the West has no idea how deep it goes. Vetrov is about to hand it all to the other side. What he cannot know, sitting in that car, is how his own country will die a little because of it, and how it will end with a knife, in a park, and a firing squad. To understand what Vetrov gave away, you have to understand what the Soviet Union was doing. By the 1970s, the Soviets had fallen behind the West in technology, badly behind. Their computers were slower, their microchips were cruder, their factories were older. The gap was dangerous. In a Cold War, falling behind in technology meant falling behind in weapons. So the Soviets built a machine to close the gap. Not a factory, a spy machine. They created a special branch of the KGB called Directorate T. Its job was to steal Western science and technology. Its field agents had a name. They were called Line X, and Line X was everywhere. Line X officers worked undercover in Soviet embassies around the world. They posed as diplomats and trade officials. They visited Western factories on friendly tours. They went to trade fairs and technical conferences. They shook hands and smiled and stole everything they could. On one visit to an American aircraft plant, a Soviet guest put adhesive on his shoes. He walked across the factory floor to collect metal shavings on the soles. That is how badly they wanted the smallest scraps of Western industry. And it worked. Line X stole radar designs. It stole computer technology. It stole machine tools and semiconductors. Soviet engineers copied American designs and built them at home. The Soviet Union was running a decade behind and closing the gap by theft. The Americans were spending billions on research, and the Soviets were simply taking it. The West did not understand the scale of it until a disillusioned engineer decided to open the door. Vladimir Vetrov was not an obvious traitor. He was a rising star. He was clever, hardworking, and trusted. His job was to evaluate the technology that Line X stole. Everything the spies brought home crossed his desk. He knew the names of the agents. He knew the shopping list of what Moscow wanted next. He knew the whole machine, from the inside. But somewhere over the years, Vetrov had stopped believing. He had served in France in the 1960s. He had seen how people in the West actually lived. He came home to a system that lied to its own people. He watched corrupt and mediocre men rise above him. He grew bitter, and then he grew resolved. At the end of 1980, Vetrov made his decision. He reached out, not to the Americans, but to the French. He had an old friend from his years in Paris, a French businessman. Through him, Vetrov offered his services to French intelligence. The French gave him a code name. They chose an English word, on purpose. If the KGB ever heard the code name, they would assume he was working for the Americans, not the French. The code name was Farewell, and Vetrov took almost no money for what he did. He did it because he had come to hate the system he served. He wanted to hurt it. He wanted the West to win. Between early 1981 and early 1982, Farewell handed over nearly 4,000 documents. He photographed them at his desk and smuggled them out. Every photograph was a death sentence if he was caught. He was not a trained field agent. He was an office man taking terrible risks in a system that shot traitors. And among them was the crown jewel, a complete list of the Line X officers operating in the West. More than 250 names. Every spy in every embassy hunting Western technology. It was the entire Soviet theft machine, exposed on paper. The French verified the documents. They were genuine. This was the most valuable counterintelligence in decades. But the French faced a hard choice. The material was too big to keep to themselves. In July of 1981, at a summit in Ottawa, the French president took the American president aside. François Mitterrand told Ronald Reagan what he had. He told him about a source inside the KGB, a source who had handed France the blueprint of Soviet technology theft. Reagan was astonished. By August, the documents were in the hands of the CIA, and as the Americans read them, something remarkable became clear. There had never really been a technology race at all. For years, American scientists thought they were racing the Soviets. In truth, they had been racing themselves. The Soviets were not inventing. They were copying. Every American breakthrough was quietly stolen and rebuilt in the East. The farewell documents laid the whole thing bare. And they included one more thing, a wish list. A detailed list of the exact technologies the Soviets still wanted to steal. The Americans now knew what the enemy was reaching for, and that gave one man an idea. His name was Gus Weiss. He was a quiet economist working on Ronald Reagan's National Security Council. In January of 1982, he went to see the director of the CIA, William Casey, and he proposed something audacious. "Do not arrest the Line X spies," he said. "Not yet. Instead, give them what they are asking for. Let them steal the technology on their wish list. But first, ruin it. Design it to work perfectly at first. And then, later, to fail." Reagan approved the plan. Casey gave it the go-ahead, and American industry quietly went to work. They built flawed microchips that passed every test, then failed in service. They wrote software with hidden faults buried deep in the code. They doctored designs for factories, for chemical plants, for machinery. They fed false plans for stealth aircraft and space technology into the pipeline, and the Line X spies, delighted, stole all of it. They carried it home to Moscow as a triumph. Soviet factories built machines from the poisoned plans. And across the Soviet Union, things began to go quietly wrong. Tractor factories produced machines that did not work. Chemical plants failed. Aircraft research ran into problems no one could explain. The Soviets could not understand why their stolen technology kept failing. They did not yet suspect that the well had been poisoned. Then there was the pipeline. The Soviet Union was building an enormous natural gas pipeline across Siberia. It would carry gas to Western Europe and earn billions. To control it, the Soviets needed sophisticated computer software. Software to run the pumps, the valves, and the pressure. They asked to buy it from an American company. The Americans refused. So the Soviets sent a Line X agent to steal it from a firm in Canada instead. And this is the version of the story told by a Reagan official named Thomas Reed. According to Reed, the Americans knew the theft was coming, so the software the Soviets stole had been changed. It would run the pipeline perfectly for a while. Then, after a decent interval, it would turn on its owners. It was programmed to reset the pumps and the valves, to build the pressure far beyond what the joints and welds could hold. In the summer of 1982, deep in Siberia, the pipeline let go. Reed described the result as the most monumental non-nuclear explosion ever seen from space. A fireball in the Siberian wilderness, visible from orbit. Now, it is important to be honest here. Not everyone believes this story. Some former officials say the explosion was caused by ordinary construction faults, not sabotage. Some say the pipeline of that era was barely automated at all. There are no news reports of the blast from the time. So the pipeline explosion remains disputed to this day. But the wider campaign is not disputed. The poison technology was real. The sabotage program was real. And the moment the Soviets realized the truth, something worse happened to them. They could no longer trust anything Line X had ever stolen. Every design, every chip, every blueprint was now suspect. The heart of the whole theft machine crumbled. The one thing that had let the Soviets keep pace with the West was now worthless. And then the West closed the trap completely. Using Farewell's list of names, Western governments moved together. They expelled Soviet technology spies from country after country. More than 100 Line X officers were sent home. The network that had taken decades to build was torn apart in months. And what of the man who started it all? Vladimir Vetrov never saw the sabotage campaign unfold. His downfall had nothing to do with spying. In early 1982, Vetrov was in a car in a Moscow park with a woman. She was his mistress and also a KGB colleague. There was an argument. A KGB officer approached the car. In circumstances that have never been fully explained, Vetrov attacked them. He stabbed and killed the officer. He stabbed the woman, but she survived. Vetrov was arrested for murder. At first, no one connected it to espionage. He was simply a man who had committed a violent crime. But in prison, Vetrov made a mistake. He wrote a letter that hinted at what he had done for the French. The KGB began to investigate, and slowly, they uncovered the truth. The colonel who had betrayed the entire technology theft program was already in their hands. Vladimir Vetrov was tried in secret. He was executed in 1985. The most damaging spy in the history of Soviet technology died for a knife fight in a park. The farewell affair is one of the strangest operations of the Cold War. A single disillusioned engineer handed the West the entire Soviet theft machine. He did it almost for free. He exposed more than 200 spies. And he let the Americans turn the machine against its makers. For years, the Soviets had believed they were catching up by stealing the future. In the end, they had stolen a trap. Every prize they smuggled home might be poisoned. And they could never again be sure which ones. The theft had been their greatest strength. Doubt turned it into their greatest weakness. It cost the West almost nothing. It cost one brave, bitter engineer his life. And it began with a man in a cold car, in the dark, deciding he had seen enough. There is one final strangeness to the story. The material farewell handed over was so perfect, so complete, that some began to doubt it. The French president himself later wondered if Vetrov had been a plant, a trap laid by Moscow to test which secrets France would share with America. It almost certainly was not. But that is what a spy this valuable does to the people he helps. He is so good that they cannot quite believe he is real.